Hi, this is Dr. John Thomas, and welcome to this video, Understanding and Interpreting Genetic Reports, specifically the Functional Genomic Analysis. Now, you're most likely watching this video because you are a patient of mine, and we are going to be reviewing your genetic data here in the next couple of days. And we sent you this link as a preview. That way you can get a pretty good idea, a pretty good foundation of how to interpret these reports and what all this information means. So we don't need to spend 10, 15 minutes going over that. We can kind of get into the meat and potatoes of your genetic data and how that plays into your chronic health issues. So why are you watching this? Like I said, watching this video, it is vital to understand your genetic report that I'm going to be reviewing with you. I don't want to spend time going over the concepts in this on our call or on our visit. So watching this will give you a pretty good foundation or understanding of what this information means. And so you, beyond what I'm go through with you, you're going to be able to review and read this report on your own, have a pretty good understanding of what it all means. The second part about understanding some of the information here is I want to go through with you how your genetics can be a big piece of the puzzle to why you have chronic health issues. And the reason we're in genetics is because genetics gives us insight into how your biochemistry works, because your genes make things like proteins and enzymes. And proteins and enzymes basically run our biochemistry. They're going to make things like our hormones, our neurochemicals. They're going to make antioxidants. They're going to help fuel our cells for energy. And so when we have genetic weakness, it can set us up or predispose us to where our biochemistry works a little bit slower, which can be a big factor into why we have chronic symptoms. So I strongly recommend watching this video a few times. That way you have a really, really good foundation of the information that we're going to go through in your genetic report when we get together. So prior to our visit or scheduled time together, we'll be in office or through a video chat to review this data. You're going to get a copy of your report emailed over to you from our office, and this is what it's going to look like. This is a 68-page report. Currently, it's always expanding. Currently, like I said, 68 pages, and there's a couple thousand genes in this report. And because there's a couple thousand genes, and typically it takes me about 45 minutes to go through this information, can't go through a couple thousand genes in 45 minutes, all right? And so that's what this video is about, to give you an understanding of how to read through and decipher through some of the other layers. Because what we're going to do in our time together is go through the genetic priorities, go through the things based on my experience, based on your health concerns that are the starting points genetically. And typically this is going to be anywhere from maybe 10 to 20 genes that we're going to talk about in that 45-minute session, because those are going to be our starting points. And we look at genetics like layers of the onion, all right? We kind of peel them back one at a time. And what we're going to be discussing when we get together are the first couple layers of the onion, and those are the priorities that we will be discussing. So why do we look at genetics? Well, I kind of talked about this a little bit already. Genetics basically gives the roadmap of how our biochemistry works, and it deals with how our body can fuel itself, how it can make hormones, neurochemicals. And usually what happens is when we have chronic symptoms, people go down the rabbit holes of looking at labs that measure those things, really not taking into consideration how our genetics can play into this. So with each gene, you have a side passed down from mom and a side passed down from dad, and that makes up your genetic predisposition. In this report, you're going to see a bunch of these letters, which are these nucleotides, A, G, C's, T's, that's the percentages. Don't get too caught up on that, which I'll explain in a second, but I will kind of just touch base on some of that information. All right, so let's talk about a little vocabulary. So some of the terminology I may use going forward in this presentation, as well as when we get together, review your genetic report, plus other things you'll kind of read out there in social media or on the internet, things of that nature, is some of this vocabulary here. When we're talking about weakness in these genes, and what we're going to be talking about in reviewing this report, is what we call SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. And basically what happens is the instruction of how our genes or our cells are copied is basically they're copied incorrectly, okay? And so the terminology that we use with this is a SNP. Some people call it variants, which is a report. It's going to be listed as variants. I'm going to use the terminology mutation. But basically, it is a incorrect copy of a gene that was passed down from mom or dad. So let's talk a little bit about this. So this is what the report looks like, and within this 68 pages, you're going to see all this kind of vocabulary, these paragraphs in here, and then you're going to see these boxes here that are clustered into different sections, okay? And these different sections are going to be based on and grouped into different topics. For instance, this right here is going to be talking about some of the genes that deal with histamine breakdown in the cells, histamine breakdown in the gut. And so this is categorized into different sections, which kind of really makes the layout really nice. But really we're going to be focusing in on when the time that we have together are these blue boxes, all right? And really what we're going to talk about is these blue boxes and what they mean, as well as what the genetic predisposition you have in terms of how many variants and mutations you have with each one of these genes. And I'll give you kind of the layman's terms of what these mean specifically to you, but this is something that on the genes that we talk about, you're going to be able to star those or kind of check those off and go back and read a little bit more about the ones that I review with you. But I do encourage you to read through the whole report, because there's some things, like I said, we're not going to have time to go through all 68 pages. If there is something that you read and it resonates with you, or it's something that you kind of a light bulb goes off and you say, I have a strong family history of that, or kind of sounds familiar that mom or dad or grandma maybe had some of those issues, you need to kind of bring it to my attention after our initial call, because maybe that moves that higher up the priority list. Maybe that's like the 6th layer of the onion, but if there is a family history, maybe that moves up to the 3rd layer of the onion, and it's something maybe we want to investigate a little bit further, a little bit deeper. All right, so we're going to be focused on these blue boxes, all these letters and numbers, and I'm going to talk to you here in a second what this all means. All right. So what do those boxes mean? So I did want to kind of zoomed in on one of these sections. And what I'm going to talk about first is the MTHFR gene. And just use this because it's a big buzzworthy, and most of you maybe have heard of MTHFR, but we're going to use this section as an example of how to read these reports. All right. So each line here, okay, each line here represents a particular gene in the body. And like I said, with each gene, you have a side passed down from mom and a side passed down from dad. That makes up your genetic predisposition on any one of these lines. Okay. Now this middle column here, this middle column is our variance column. And this is really the big thing we want to focus on, because in this variance column, you're going to see 3 options. You're going to see a blank box, you're going to see a 1, or you're going to see a 2. And that's it. Okay. Those are the only 3 options. Now, like I mentioned, with each gene, you have a side passed down from mom and a side passed down from dad. And if the box is blank, what that indicates is that both parents passed down a normal gene. And if the gene was passed down normal, whatever that gene makes, whether it be a protein or enzyme, most likely that protein or enzyme is going to function at 100%. It's going to do what it's supposed to do in the human body, and that's what we want. Okay. Now, if we have a particular gene that has a 1 there, what that indicates is one parent passed down a normal gene, but your other parent passed down an altered or mutated copy of the gene. So you have 1 SNP or 1 variant. Okay, we don't know which parent it is, so you can't pass down blame, but we know one parent passed on a normal gene and the other parent passed down an altered or mutated gene. Big picture with that is if you have 1 mutated copy of a gene or 1 SNP, the enzyme or the protein, whatever that gene makes, is not going to function at 100%. There could be as much as a 30% reduction in how effective whatever that gene makes can do. Okay, so if you've got a 1 there and this gene's coding or making an enzyme, that enzyme can maybe only function at 70% capacity. So there's a 30% reduction or loss of what that enzyme is capable of doing. Now, if we have a 2 in a box, what that indicates is both parents passed down an altered or mutated copy of a gene. So mom passed down a mutation, dad passed down a mutation. That's why you have a 2 there. All right. And big picture with this, if we have a 2, what that indicates is the gene going to make something that's not going to function at 100%. All right. And it's going to be even functioning less at a percent than a 1. So if you've got a 2 in there, if you've got 2 variants or 2 SNPs, what that indicates is that the enzyme or protein can maybe function anywhere from 10 to 50% capacity. So a 50 to 90% loss of whatever that protein or enzyme is capable of doing. So a pretty big reduction or slowdown in higher biochemistry works. So with this, obviously 2s are bigger deals. Now, it's not the be-all end-all, but more often than not, we're looking at sections throughout these 68 pages that got a whole cluster of 2s. Okay, there's some things that maybe there's clusters of 1s that are important because of kind of my genetic priority list, but we're comparing the biggest ones in the research, we're comparing your health concerns, previous labs to this genetic report, and areas that you possibly have a lot of twos, and really trying to connect the dots to see is your genetic predisposition a factor in your recovery process, okay? So real quick in this, I just want to talk about the percentages. These A's, T's, G's, C's, these are the nucleotide components we talked about. Don't get too caught up on that and what these are and how they're, it's kind of more for us from a clinical side of things. But I do want to just real quick touch on the percentages, okay? So the percentages are pretty important, and it really is more for the practitioner, for myself, because it's really there also for research purposes, because what the percentage show us is they show us the percent of the population in our database that have that many mutations, okay? So if we look here at this MTHFR 677, where this shows a 5.1%, and this person has a 2 there, only about 5% of the population has a 2, okay? And if we look at the one above this, 16.8% of the population, only about 16.8% of the population has a 1. So the lower the number, the rarer it is, okay? And that doesn't mean that just because it's a low percentage, it's something that we have to, consider. But the thing is, if there's some things in there that maybe give some insight into some of the symptoms you're experiencing, it's not something I see all the time, and it is a low percentage, and it's not kind of my priority list, those are maybe some things that kind of rise to the top in terms of priorities that maybe want to consider investigating or supporting a little bit deeper, just because it is a low percentage and it is not as common to have mutations there. All right, so let's kind of explain this a little bit deeper to kind of give you a picture of what this all means, okay? So I always use this concept of an interstate highway with traffic, because if we look at your genetics, okay, think of this genetic report that we're going to be reviewing as the infrastructure of your biochemistry. And so we were talking about traffic. Think of traffic in a big city. I'm here in Atlanta, so traffic in Atlanta and in outside of Atlanta can get pretty crazy at times, okay? But if we think of our biochemistry very similar to an interstate highway, you've got two components. You've got how many lanes there are for traffic to flow, and then you've also got how many cars on the road, okay? So this genetic report is giving us the infrastructure of your biochemistry. So this genetic report is really showing us how many lanes there are for traffic to flow. So if you've got normal function, okay, meaning that you've got a 0 or that box is blank, okay? If that box is blank in that report, it's like you have 8 lanes for traffic to flow, all right? Now, if you have a 1, okay, what that indicates is instead of having 8 lanes, you've got 4 lanes, all right? So basically how your biochemistry is made is like we need 8 lanes from point A to point Z to be open all the time. There's a stretch of the road where the highway narrows down from 8 lanes down to 4. And if you have a 2, what that can indicate is the highway narrows down from 8 lanes down to 1. So if you're driving through a big city and it's an 8-lane highway and all of a sudden you come up to a stretch of the road where it narrows down from 8 lanes down to 1, that may not be a good thing. Now, the problem with this is really what it comes down to is how many cars are on the highway. Because if you have 1 car on the road and it's 3:30 in the morning, it doesn't matter if you have 8 lanes or 1 lane, traffic's still going to flow. But if it's rush hour in a big city and you've got a stretch of the road that narrows from 8 lanes down to 1 with thousands of cars on the road, that's where the problem lies. You're going to have gridlock. You're going to have bumper-to-bumper traffic, and nobody's going to get to home on time, okay? So the traffic is what we call epigenetics. And basically what this means is this is our environment. This is kind of the things we're exposed to. So this is chemicals and heavy metals, different toxins. This is previous infections like viruses and bacteria and parasitic issues. This is things like emotional stress, physical traumas. All this stuff are stressors or epigenetic factors that put more traffic on the highway, okay? So here, think of it this way, all right? You've got a stretch of the road that narrows down and you start putting more and more cars on the highway, all right? There's more and more congestion the more the highway narrows down, all right? And like I said, the traffic is going to slow down our biochemistry, all right? And so this could be something where people say all the time, it's like, well, if this is my genetics, how come it hasn't been a problem until now? Well, you've always had this genetic predisposition. The amount of lanes you're born with, all right? But what's happened is over time, you've put more and more traffic on the highway where now all of a sudden you've got congestion. It's a problem, okay? So there's 2 components of this, is we can address your biochemistry understanding genetic reports, because we can kind of take certain nutrients and supplements and things of that nature to redirect traffic or orchestrate traffic to flow more effectively But if you're still putting traffic on the highway, you're never really optimally going to, have pathways that function at 100%, right? So it's twofold. We want to support where the highway narrows down. We also want to do strategies to remove traffic. And that comes into a lot of things we do from a gut cleansing and detoxification, and talking about lifestyle changes that can really reduce the amount of traffic on the highway to take stress off where your highway narrows, all right? So basically our goal is to do this. We're trying to take an area of your highway or biochemistry that's got a whole bunch of traffic, and we're trying to turn it into this, because this is your genetics. We're not going to change how many lanes are available, all right? We're not going to be able to take a 1-lane road and turn it into an 8-lane road, all right? But knowing this information is vital, because we know how to support areas where the highway narrows down with specific nutrients and supplements and things of that nature. But the goal is to turn a congested highway into a highway that can function and flow more effectively, okay? Like I said, we're trying to take a whole bunch of traffic and turn it into this, right? And the problem with this is if you have enough traffic, even on an 8-lane highway, there's still going to be congestion. Think of a big city like Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, things of that nature. So even if you have a 0 in those boxes, or meaning that box is blank, you still may not be 100% in the clear, because, like I said, if you put enough traffic on an 8-lane highway, it's going to eventually slow down. All right? So key points regarding this genetic data that we're going to discuss. This data does not diagnose, okay? This data is not meant to tell you that you have a disease or pathology, okay? We're looking at genetics from a functional standpoint. We're looking at genetics to determine how your biochemistry works. We're not looking at genetics like a traditional medical geneticist is going to look at it in terms of like 1 gene equals 1 diagnosis, all right? This is about function. This is about how your biochemistry works, okay? These SNPs, or these mutations, these variants, what they really do is they raise our level of suspicion, okay, and give us insight that this is a high likelihood there's a problem here, all right? Basically, it gives us insight that the highway was narrowing down. We've got an area in your biochemistry where the highway narrows from 8 lanes down to 1. Let's investigate that further, okay? Like I said, in this report, this is 68 pages. It's got a couple thousand genes. On the gene test that you did with that saliva sample, there's over 200,000 genes on that gene card. And there's still a whole bunch on that gene card that we don't have a whole lot of clinical insight in what it means. Genetics is a new science. It's only been around since the 90s. It's really evolved in the last 10 to 15 years, and how we can apply it in clinical practice, especially with people who have chronic issues. So the good thing about it is that it could be 5 years from now. It could be 1 year from now. There's going to be some more information that comes out through research that may give more information to be able to take your health to the next level. And the great thing about it is you never have to redo this test, because this test is this test. It's not going to change. We're not going to redo this in a year and we're going to see those 1s and 2s any different. This is what your mom gave you. This is what your mom and dad gave you, okay? This is your genetic predisposition, right? The other thing with these reports a lot of people do is we don't want to get in the habit of trying to put a supplement in place for everything that's got a 1 or a 2, okay? Number one, you'd be taking a whole bunch of stuff and just it's way too much for the body to tolerate. It gets way too expensive. So we're really prioritizing this down. We're correlating your genetic report, your genetic predisposition to your health concerns, to previous labs, and really trying to orchestrate a game plan going forward. So don't get in the mindset that we got to put something in place for every single thing. There's a method to the madness. We start with the first couple of layers, work from there. And a lot of times, if you address some of the genetic priorities, then everything else starts taking care of itself. And to kind of talk about this again, we gotta have an understanding of epigenetics, all right? We gotta be aware of our environment. We gotta be aware of stressors we've been exposed to, because that is the traffic on the highway. If you just take this mindset of we're gonna just support your genetics only and not have any idea about what the traffic's doing or how much traffic we put on the road, we are completely missing the boat, okay? So if we understand how our epigenetics, or how those stressors, toxins, infection, things of that nature correlate to our genetic predisposition, we have a better understanding. Because what happens is if you take a highway that narrows from 8 lanes down to 1 and you put a whole bunch of traffic on that with stressors like heavy metals or infections, viral issues, whatever it may be, it creates that perfect storm. And more often than not, with what we're going to be doing, looking at the labs that we're going to be looking at, the genetics that we're going to be reviewing, we're going to determine where a couple of those perfect storms are happening, and we address that, and you really start noticing that the needle starts moving in the right direction health-wise for you. All right, so that is the basically a summary of the Functional Genomic Analysis report. Like I said, please watch this video again so you have a really, really good understanding of how to interpret this report, what this all means. Because like I said, I'm not going to have the time to go through this with you. What I want to do is just jump into your genetic data and use our time together to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of how this information is playing into your health, and not spend that time reviewing how to read this report and what it all means. Okay, so watch this a couple times so you have a really good understanding of what I've talked about on this video. And if you have any questions, you can get those answered prior to jumping into this information. Other than that, this is Dr. John Thomas, and I look forward to reviewing this data with you and helping you through this journey to change your life.